If we in any way want to do better or do history better, we have to be courageous.
That's why it's essential that we acknowledge the people upon whose backs this country was founded.
The more people understand someone else's perspective, the more likely they are to listen.
We're going to make a better future for ourselves. We need to.
I hope that in 30 or 40 years that conversations like this will not be necessary. I hope in 30 or 40 years we will look at each other and see each other as Americans.
I think that once people really know the history, I think then people will begin to have respect for one another.
This is not just Black history. This is America's story.
In Southampton County, a house still stands that serves as a reminder of the terrors that took place here nearly 200 years ago. The terrors of slavery and violence that gripped this county, leaving behind a complex story still being told and discussed to this day.
It's very difficult most of the time to piece together two sides of the same story.
The Vaughn House is the last building still around these parts involved in the Slave Revolt of 1831, led by one of Southampton County's most infamous sons, Nat Turner.
He was a man that had children. He was a man who lived in a horrible circumstance, but yet he still had visions, and he had a desire to make the world better than what he inherited. Like I say, he was born a slave on October the 2nd, 1800. He died in technicality as a free man because he wasn't owned by anyone at the time that he died.
The story of Nat Turner's been told through Hollywood and literature over the years, but those here in the county are walking results of many critical decisions made during the days of that insurrection. Turner's story begins in 1800 when he was born enslaved on the plantation of Benjamin Turner. Records in the Southampton County Courthouse first show him appearing by name in 1810.
On the first page will be the first time that Nat Turner appears in our records, and spelled Nat with two T's, interestingly. But here you have Nat, you have Cherry, you have a lot of those, the individuals, Tom and Bridget are named, as well as Nancy. They are all named in Benjamin Turner's last will and testament.
Rick Francis is a lifelong Southampton County resident. He's also the county's circuit court clerk.
Southampton County is unique among most of the counties in Virginia. The records here, thanks to a man by the name of Ken Brantley, are all freely available online, all of our pre-1880 records.
Those records have been devoured by Francis and fellow Southampton County native Bruce Turner. Their interest in the revolt is what brought these two together.
It happened in 2001, right down the street down there at a church, where they were holding a conversation, afternoon, I guess, discussion about the insurrection and Nat Turner. And it just so happened Rick and I ended up sitting beside each other at the same table.
And I think we just started shooting the breeze while the other participants were talking, and then followed up afterward.
Right. And we've been keeping in contact with each other.
That meeting could be considered fate once you know who these two are.
I'm a descendant to Nat Turner, I'm actually third generation. He's my great-great-great-great-grandfather.
And my great-great-grandfather was Nathaniel Francis, Nathaniel Lavinia, and they survived the insurrection. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Bruce and Rick grew up during the same time, just miles apart, but worlds away. Bruce says the insurrection wasn't really talked about among the community's Black residents, but Rick?
We had a page and a half at most in our 7th grade history book on Nat Turner. Even though we were right here in the midst of it, that was the only coverage we got of it.
Unlike many enslaved, Nat could read and write. He was also deeply religious, becoming a preacher to those enslaved. Historians say Nat had visions, and many others in his community believed he was a prophet sent from God. Nat preached against slavery, and in 1831, after seeing an eclipse, he decided to plan his revolt for later that year. On August 21st, Nat and 40 others of those enslaved started their 2-day trek throughout the county, killing around 50 white people. Just feet away from where I sat down with Bruce and Rick was the Nottoway River, another tangible reminder of those days.
That was the physical barrier that actually kept Nat from making it here initially to Southampton, into Cortland. He was originally intending to come here, but the old bridge was blocked. So he decided to try to go down and use the alternate bridge, which is the Cypress Bridge, which is about a mile further down, and come in from the south side.
But both Bruce and Rick are also reminders of the lives that were saved that night.
My family tree was trimmed during the insurrection. My great-great-grandfather, this handsome man, and his wife Lavinia, that's great-great-grandfather. His sister was the co-owner of Nat Turner at the time of the insurrection. Nat Turner, by law, was owned by the oldest male child, which would have been a Putnam Moore, but his sister Sally was the matriarch of that family, so she was the second person to get the axe, so to speak. And then his brother Salathiel was the next house hit. But throughout my education, particularly through my parents, my father was repeatedly instructing me and my brothers that if it had not been for the loyalty of 3 slaves acting independently of each other, my family line would have been extinguished.
Rick says Nat's group came to his great-great-grandparents' house.
But through the words of a young male slave, Nathaniel had left the farm to check on his sisters. A slave by the name of Red Nelson took pregnant Lavinia and basically put her over his shoulder and tucked her into a little cubby hole on the second floor, so got her immediately out of the line of the insurrectionists as they came through the house looking through all the rooms. And then as she left that room after the insurrectionists had left, she was accosted by a female slave by the name of Charlotte downstairs, going through her wedding dresses with, among other slaves, and a third slave by the name of Esther, actually it's Easter, basically pushed Charlotte out of the way, got Lavinia out of the house.
Rick says Nathaniel survived also because he left the home. And on the other side of the county, Bruce's family tree was also saved. He says at the time of the insurrection, Nat lived on the Moore Travis plantation, but his wife Cherry and their children were owned by a man named Gills Reese.
Nat passed his farm. When you go out on the map and you look at Cabin Pond, where they started off on the insurrection, they had 2 choices. They could go to the Travis farm where Nat was living, or they could go to the Reese farm, which was closer. And it's believed that Nat chose to go to the Travis farm because he was Travis was the male master, and he left the Reese farm alone because that's where his wife and children were. And even later on, when they moved about and they circled about, they came back again by the Reese farm and they bypassed it. Shortly after the insurrection, instead, the whites began to regain control and they started going out on this horrible killing rampage. It was that Gills Reese protected Cherry and the children. And Charlotte was the youngest. She was a baby. She was born on May 30, 1830, so she was only 1 year old at that time. And I imagine the mobs wanted to completely eradicate Nat Turner's line. And the story that was passed down through our family was that Gills protected them on his farm and then eventually sent them to live with the Nottoway Indians, which had a reservation in the area. And then from there, eventually Cherry and Charlotte came back to the Reese farm, and then they were later sold to John Clark Turner's farm. And they were at the John Clark Turner farm in 1865, when the Civil War ended slavery.
That insurrection lasted 2 days, but it took almost 2 months for Nat Turner to be caught.
This is the original sentencing order for Nat Turner.
On November 11th, 1831, Nat Turner died after he was hung from a tree believed to be located in this spot. While Nat died technically a free man, the implications of the revolt were felt not just throughout Virginia, but the South. Many states passed new laws restricting both those enslaved and free by targeting their ability to travel, assemble, and learn how to read or write. But through Bruce and Rick, they're trying to show how heroism of that night led to other implications.
You can practically count on your hands, on your fingers, the good times, or the real good events. Mostly everything in history is not good. When you look back in the last 100 years that has happened, we have more good that has come about in that last 100 years than it happened in the 1,000 years before that. And when you break it down to say the last 50 years, in this country particularly, we have had far more good that has outpaced the bad. So it seems like we're on a good track now, that the next 50 years, there's going to be less bad, more good. So that when we get to that 100-year mark from now, you and I won't be here to see it, but there's going to be the people, I believe, 100 years from now will be living with those three words in a much better environment because of the way we have embraced and decided to say, all right, all that stuff that happened had to stop.
As for the two, Bruce is writing a book about his lineage and gives talks to the community about his ancestor, Nat. Rick, who says he's also related to President Abraham Lincoln, is divulging the history he's also learned and gives a Nat Turner tour in Southampton County.
As respectful as I am of my ancestors, they were not perfect. Golly day, they were certainly not perfect, but I would not trade a tomorrow for all the yesterdays, wanting to look back and only operate from the past. I mean, that's there, that's then, that I guess influences some of my decisions, certainly. I'm sure I have baggage that I don't recognize, but that's just part of what makes me who I am, and I hope I will leave this earth better than I found it.
While the years continue to tick further away since those late August days in 1831, Rick and Bruce's story can be a reminder of the good that can come from learning about our lineage and history.
I think that's just personal to themselves. I mean, I don't think we're necessarily unusual. I think we both like history. We enjoy doing the research. We may come to different conclusions on individual aspects of it, and we beat each other up every now and then on what about this or what about that. But it's I think it's the scholarly thought as much as anything. I just, people are people, and it never surprises me the horrors that humans can inflict on other humans. But I'm hoping that's not our nature across the board, and I don't think it is. I still think there are more good than bad in this world, and it's you got to make your own choices of what values you have, whether you want to live your life looking in the rearview mirror, going forward, looking back. I hope we take it as a lesson from the past, to hopefully never tread those steps again, but I think it's an individual journey.
Two individual journeys that brought these two together in hopes of helping others understand what happened, but also what can be.
When someone else be sitting out here in these exact same chairs, or in this site spot, in your spot, they would be able to articulate some of the things in which that we found. And if they can do just a little bit of it right, then I would have done my job, and Rick would have done his job.